first time was for 20 years, from about 1991 until 2011. And then I took some time off and became the Chief of Planning and Design for the Minneapolis Park Board, as well as had my own advisory practice, really focusing in on strategy work, helping communities look at complicated redevelopment initiatives and community development initiatives and carry them from vision to implementation. And now I'm back with HKGI starting in October of this past year, and really focusing on marrying those two aspects of my career path over time, between urban design and thinking about the design of and planning of communities, as well as how we carry those big visions and community initiatives from vision to implementation. And this project is the right in that wheelhouse, because downtown plans are so important to understand from a vision standpoint and so difficult to accomplish over time. So I look forward to the opportunity to help all of you. I'm going to turn it over to Rita, and as I do, I'm going to pull up the slides that we have as well.
All right, thanks, Bruce. So I'm Rita Trapp. I will be assisting Bruce with this project, and I am a planner with HKGI for 18 years and have done a wide range of land use planning. I also work on parks and trails, and I do a lot of planning services, so very familiar with the aspect of actual doing the development and working with developers on projects. And I actually work in the Chisago Lakes region up in Lindstrom as well. So very familiar with this area and excited to be with you tonight.
All right. And there's Rita. If you can you all see my screen? Picture of Rita, a picture of me. And Dan has a copy of this presentation, and it's got my contact information on it, both my email as well as my phone number. So I welcome any conversation or questions, or feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to chat. So this is just a little bit of a depiction of the study area. Essentially, it encases or includes the downtown core of Forest Lake, and you can see the water's edge of the lake itself, and then the trail is extending through, if you can see my cursor, right through this area. The bridge over Broadway is right here, and obviously the roundabout, which is really distinctive. The important note that I want to stress is that while we are looking at this district as the focus of the plan, it's really important for us, and you're going to see a lot of information coming from us, that looks at both the context beyond this boundary and how the downtown fits into that context, as well as important connections that are happening across this boundary. Obviously, this is just a boundary on a map, and there's a lot of activity, a lot of really important functionality and experiential quality that happens across these borders. So we're going to be looking a lot, and you're going to see a lot in the analysis work that helps us understand the context of this place within the broader community and the region as well. A little bit about what a downtown plan is, and this is some of the slide information that some of you have seen already, but I think it provides a good basis for how we think about the downtown plan here and how it fits in to the context of other things Forest Lake as a community has going on. So I think maybe the most important aspect of this is coalescing a community vision. And the idea is that we will be developing analysis work that establishes the basis for how we think about this district. We will be reaching out to the community in various forms through the planning process, but early on to understand values and community vision, and coalescing that information into a baseline vision for where Forest Lake goes with its downtown is really critical. And one of the things we have built into our work plan is that there's kind of a two-stage approval of the downtown plan as it is developed. The first stage is really approval by all of you and a recommendation to the city council for the vision itself. And that might be a statement, It might be a depiction, as in this case for downtown Red Wing, a depiction of values and how those values fit into vision. But it's mostly words, maybe some iconic graphics like you see here, but essentially it is the launching pad for where we go with the second half, I'll say, of this planning process, and that is to look at concepts for land use, concepts for redevelopment, concepts for public realm. It establishes that foundation, and it's something that we can always go back to as we're walking through the rest of the process. Next, it's about land use and public realm vision. And these are two areas of downtowns that we've looked at before. On the left is downtown Mound, and on the right is downtown Hastings. This right image obviously depicts land use with the downtown and its surrounding area, and that was part of the plan for that particular project, and it is part of the strategy for downtown Forest Lake as well, is to think about land use and whether there are any modifications or tweaks that would be suggested as part of the downtown plan for that land use. And then the public realm vision, downtown Mound is really built on creating a new public realm vision, and this has happened over the last now 30 years really, where we completely kind of reestablished the form and function of downtown based on a public realm strategy. So where's the open space? How are people connecting through downtown? How are they connecting with downtown from neighborhoods? All of that public realm, whether it's trails or green space, or in the case of Mound, a boat canal, all becomes part of this public realm vision that's important to setting the framework for developers or property owners making investments within that context. My screen is hidden on the very top. Whoops, sorry. The downtown plan is an implementation toolkit. I think I may have, no, that's the next slide. Sorry about that. An implementation toolkit, which is really an action plan. So there are going to be a whole host of recommendations that are built off of this process. And we want to be able to give you the tools necessary for implementing the downtown plan over what seems like a long period of time, but it's going to be at least a decade and probably 15 years before you may want to think about redoing your downtown plan and creating the next iteration, the next generation of a downtown plan. This again is Red Wing, where we looked at the recommendations that came out of the plan and how they fit into the vision and the community values that were established early in the process. Importantly, it also has these decision principles, which are part of it. And the notion is that the community going forward can use this as a checklist in evaluating any ideas that are coming up, whether it's from a developer or a property owner or a community member about public realm, whatever they are, to begin to understand how others' activities fit into the vision and the values of the community that were established with the plan. So an investment roadmap becomes really important, and there are multiple facets to investment, but primarily they fall in two buckets. One is public realm improvements, streets, streetscape, parks, waterfronts if they're public, all those things that are accomplished by the community and directly invested by the city itself. The other bucket primarily is redevelopment. So the downtown plan creates a framework for how developers react to what Forest Lake is saying they want and how they position their investments into the broader vision created by the community. And having both of these aspects thought of as part of the downtown plan becomes really important for you. Obviously, in looking at capital improvements over time, as well as in responding to developers or other investors who are interested in making private property investments within the community. Redevelopment plan is also, or a downtown plan is also a redevelopment vision. So these are just a couple of alternative examples for a redevelopment area within Fergus Falls that HKGI worked on a few years ago. But if we scope down from the broader community to the district of the downtown to a particular site, or maybe a grouping of a couple of sites, the downtown plan really creates a strategy for redevelopment. In this case, we're going to be focusing on possible redevelopment or the potential for redevelopment within city-owned properties. So there are a number of city-owned properties that we'll look at from a redevelopment perspective. And that redevelopment might include open space or park, public realm, as well as how development fits within that open space. So it doesn't have to be just private redevelopment. It very well could be investment in new public realm or transition public realm. So a downtown plan is also this implementation toolkit. And this is an example of downtown Excelsior, where we're working on a lakefront park on Lake Minnetonka called the Commons. And in that, we've developed an overall strategy for investments. So thinking about how the community approaches phasing to investments, in this case, a park, not necessarily as broad as a downtown. And then how to think about the cost and financial or capital implications of those investments. So it becomes, again, part of this implementation toolkit. This time around phasing and budgeting, that becomes really important for the community. Another one is capital sources and uses. So to think about not only the cost side, but also the sources side, and where potentially could money come from. Again, this is just a one that was developed for that Commons Park. But it looks at potentially, a whole range of city sources as well as third-party sources. And in this case, there was a philanthropic campaign that was launched in order to accomplish that project. So that was its own column or line item. Also operating pro forma. So this is an area that I think is becoming more and more understood and more and more important to thinking about downtown planning. And that is, what are the operational demands of what's being designed? So how do we make sure that we are communicating not only what is being thought of within this vision for downtown, what the cost of that vision might be, but also what the operating demands could be when you implement it, so that you have really a full life cycle range of understanding of what is being proposed with the plan. And then it's an evaluation tool also. So when others come to you as a community and are interested in making an investment, the downtown plan creates a framework and a foundation upon which to evaluate those concepts or those redevelopment proposals. So the downtown plan creates this ability for you to position other people's investments within your own context and vision for the downtown district. And then finally, it's an activation strategy. And again, this is a category that is emerging as something really important in thinking about with downtown plans. So this is River's Edge Commons in Elk River, a project that we've been working on for, again, decades, and done a number of expansions to it. But to think about how we leverage the physical infrastructure that might be built by you over time with this downtown plan from an activation standpoint, because really what it's all about is creating a vibrant, activated, and exciting downtown that people want to come to. So how are we stacking activation strategies onto the infrastructure that is actually being built? And then rolling that into the way we think about programming and operational demands of not only what's being built, but how it's being activated. So all of these things are part of the scope of the downtown plan for Forest Lake, and things that we'll be developing through the course of the kind of the 1-year time frame of creating the downtown plan. What we want to do is pause there. We can go back to any of those slides if you want to talk more, but have a chance to have some discussion and Q&A about what you saw there. If there's anything that doesn't seem to make sense, or you want to talk about more things, let's do that. We're happy to chat about that. I'll mention also that there is a chat box question. I assume it's kind of already posted, but what are the most important things you want, not your want, but you want out of a downtown plan? Of all those things or other things that you can think of, what's most important to you? So if you can provide those in the chat box, that'd be great.
Thanks, Bruce. Could I just for a moment just have you stop sharing your screen just so we're able to see
Yes.
faces, a little easier to collaborate?
I would agree.
Just a quick pause and opportunity for feedback on kind of planned scope for these upcoming activities. I think it's really important that we make sure we've captured expectations of what the plan is and is not, and just wanted to give a pause point for any clarifying questions or feedback. And please jump in. I see a hand up. Susan, if you're able, go ahead. If you want to drop in chat, that's fine as well. I know she was having some technology challenges. So Susan, jump in if you're able to hear us. And Mark, go ahead.
Oh, okay. More and more I start to wonder if we shouldn't. I know they're going to think beyond the bounds we have shown them for our downtown. But more and more, it's so constrained. Our geographic area is so constrained. There aren't that many public options. There's more private options than public ones. And so I'm wondering if we shouldn't expand that horizon just a bit. I don't know if public can gain any more ground in this story, but maybe it should be thought of for just a little while. What if our limits shifted a bit? And what if that meant that the public aspect of it all could gain some ground? It's just worth taking a quick look to not get too restricted by the geographic limits we put on, because our geographic limits are really tight.
Go ahead, Bruce.
Go ahead, please, Mayor.
No, I was just gonna turn it over to you and to see if you had, with that feedback, do you have some recommendations on how other communities and how projects have kind of taken in a broader, a focused area where we, certainly want to make some progress, but also taken that perspective of a broader community lens? Like, what are your recommendations as you hear that?
Well, a couple of thoughts. One is that the broader the area, kind of the less detail the process can put into the geography that is scoped. So it just tends to, a little bit, and it's probably, Mark, you're probably not talking about a large expansion, but I think from what I understand, you as a community have gone through a fairly lengthy process to think about what the limits or what the scope of this downtown district, as it's being defined for this plan, includes and entails. And for me to say it should be something different, I think would negate a lot of that upfront conversation that happened leading up to the point that we've gotten involved. What I have seen in other communities is that as long as you and us and all of us have a view of the context, the boundary of the downtown plan maybe has less importance because we're considering that edge extremely permeable anyway. But I do think that defining the downtown so that it encases or encompasses what essentially is the commercial boundary of the downtown limit makes a lot of sense. And going beyond that, and I know you've got a lot of bleed essentially in a couple of different directions, especially from your downtown core. I would say it can get watered down, and defining what you want ultimately to be that most vibrant downtown core and using that as the definition of your plan makes the most sense.
Bruce, we've talked about a phased approach and how, one of the things that came up during the interview process is you mentioned that many of your clients are long-term clients and you work on, different phases of projects. Are those things that once we identify those themes for downtown, we could pull into a future project? Is there risk of, could we, if we wanted to do an extension down Broadway to some more of the, closer to the freeway retail district, for example, or further down Highway 61 into some of the highway business, could those be future phases kind of given the plan from downtown, or how would that layer in?
Certainly you can expand. Let's say you're thinking about public realm improvements or streetscape improvements, and the notion of expanding or extending those streetscape improvements down Broadway, that's easy, makes a lot of sense to do. I think what I would suggest is that in the future, if you are interested in looking at an aspect of the community that has a different center of energy or center of focus, to do a downtown-like plan for that additional area rather than bleeding this downtown plan either farther north, west, or south, if that makes any sense. Because I think the danger in expanding the district too much or into areas that have a different center of energy is that they never really will function as part of this downtown core. They'll function as part of its own center of energy, inherent center, and trying to bleed this plan into that area, it might be more challenging than successful.
Understood. We had a question dropped into the chat from Susan Young, a framework to evaluate future zoning use changes and public and private investments.
Yes, absolutely. That's inherent to the land use plan. So this downtown plan will include a land use guidance plan or a land use vision. So that is the basis for any zoning changes and detailed guide changes for the city. Rita, did I describe that correctly? Rita is really the expert in this category.
Yes, I think the only thing I might add is we would have a direction in the downtown plan about future use, but then kind of one of the strategies that would come out is a look at how is the zoning currently structured and are there changes needed as a result of that to implement. So it'd be probably more as part of the implementation strategies to identify where there's conflicts or where there isn't the type of zoning that you need to implement the vision that was established.
Thanks, Rita.
Yep.
Understand. Other questions that might be in the group on kind of scope, planned scope, what's in and what is out. And I will also say, for those items that are out, that doesn't necessarily have to be out of scope for the EDA. The EDA is larger than just this one project, and certainly those out of scope items may find a home elsewhere on the EDA work plan. One thing I'll just mention, just to keep in mind, is as most of you know, the city has been working on a 10-year financial plan, and so those financial outcomes, that implementation toolkit, capital sources and uses, that operating pro forma, to the extent that we, move on these plan items, those become just part of that 10-year financial plan. And so keep in mind that it's not just feedback that is going to be, sitting on a shelf somewhere. That feedback we have an active plan on the part of the city that is waiting for this type of feedback and inputs to be kind of modeled into our overall financial plan. And to me, that's been a missing piece on execution on some plans of this type in the past. We haven't brought it down to what does that mean for general fund levy? What does that mean for other sources of revenue that would those pieces need to come together to make a plan be successful. All right, other questions or comments at this point? Then I'll turn it back over to Bruce and Rita.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen again. Make sure I didn't miss a slide. Okay. So a little bit about the planning process. Again, this is a slide that some of you have seen, but essentially we refer to it as a stair-step planning process where with every step of the process that we travel through, you gain a little bit better perspective and a little higher elevation in being able to see the picture of how this is unfolding. So there are essentially 8 steps to our process. And I'll go through the calendar of the schedule in just a minute. But we start with organizing the effort. Essentially, we're in the process, which is step 1 right now, where we're organizing the effort. And we are actively working on steps 2 and 3 also, which is to understand what downtown is. So we want to understand the situation that downtown Forest Lake finds itself in. So we're collecting a lot of GIS background data, we're collecting traffic data, just all the things that feed into our understanding of downtown. And then number 3, what influences will cause downtown to change? So here in number 3, we'll get into trends and projections for what we've discovered and found through steps 1 and 2. So we'll look at both very broad national market trends as well as very local market trends to understand and fit or position downtown within those, and begin to transform the analysis work into, I call it telling a story with the data that we find, so that we can begin to see and project how downtown may or may not go depending on the forces that are behind it today. So those are pieces that we're actively working on, 1, 2, and 3. We have another meeting set up for late June where we'll be presenting a lot of that information again to this group in our second overall meeting. So step 4, what the community wants downtown to become, and that really is the vision. So once we collect the data and analyze that in the first few steps, number 4 is really where the community gets engaged. So you can see the values and vision workshop in step 4. We will have initiated online outreach to community members, and Rita's going to talk about different forms of engagement. But step 4 is really where we establish that community vision based on community values and bring that back to all of you for nods of approval and recommendation essentially to the City Council for adopting that community vision statement and the values that may back that up. Then we launch in steps 5 and onward into alternative pathways. And those are alternatives for land use guidance, alternatives for public realm design, alternatives for the way downtown is positioned from an intensity standpoint, circulation standpoint, all the components and the layers that fit into and make up a strong downtown, and some of which you've already got, some of which need to be modified, and some of which will be completely new to the district as you currently know it. So, and number 6, we'll be going back out to the community again, as well as to the development community to evaluate and critique the ideas that have been generated, so that we can gain a sense both from developers who might be looking at specific property investments to the broader community who has the community's best interests in mind, kind of at the broadest sense, and understand how people react to those ideas and really test and gain critique of those ideas. We'll be working obviously with you all the way through this process, but step 6 is a really critical piece for you to be engaged, you meaning the downtown committee and the EDA, and taking the feedback that we receive to the alternatives and making recommendation to a preferred plan, and winnowing those ideas or those broad alternatives down to a preferred approach. And again, I think of this as a series of layers. So land use is a layer, public realm design is another layer, circulation is another layer. There are are a whole host of these layers that fit into a successful and a thriving downtown. So we want to look at all of them as a series of layers, each of which have fit into that preferred plan. And then finally, the implementation steps, some of the things you saw on the slides we presented earlier, how to make it happen, really gets at a lot of the detail around capital investment, phasing strategy, the recommendations themselves and how they fit into the picture, and then operations and activation as well. Do any of you have questions on this slide, the planning process? I know there's a lot of information in here, but if you have questions right now, I'll hear those before we move on.
Any questions? I'm not seeing anybody, so jump in. Just
Okay.
jump in if there's any questions.
Oh, yeah.
All
But we
right.
can, oh, is there a question?
No, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Okay. We can come back to this too. So the schedule, essentially we have a 1-year time frame or thereabouts. And we're obviously in the mid to late May, and really working on, again, those first 3 steps that we talked about. This diagram shows where we have downtown committee meetings, the first of which is here on the schedule, and where we have community workshops or community engagement, kind of specific community engagement activities. The first one will be, is expected in July. October is the second, and then finally February is when we would lay out the preferred plan, the draft of the preferred plan, and gain final community feedback on that. And then a couple of city council meetings with the stars. One is here. Again, this is approval of the vision, and then finally approval of the overall draft plan as well. So the hope is that there is a lot of interaction that happens between this committee and the broader community, as well as other elected and appointed officials. And we've built in structure to ensure that happens at certain stages, and we have all the confidence that that will happen, certainly at those stages, but really throughout the process, just because Forest Lake is a tight-knit community and there's a lot of communication from our understanding that happens all the way through the process. Current activities, I talked a little bit about these, but this is just a little bit of review. We're focusing on, for now, the first 3 steps in our process, organizing the effort, what downtown is and what influences will cause downtown to change. Some of the elements of those are the walking tour that was conducted a few weeks ago, the kickoff downtown committee meeting, this one, the updated work plan and schedule, which you saw. We're working on news release and social media content for this process that will be part of which will be put onto a webpage, the city's webpage. And then the step 2 is really about downtown and context analysis in all kinds of forms that I touched on. And then step 3 will include stakeholder interviews, which we're gearing up for, as well as focus groups. So stakeholder interviews would be more one-on-one interviews, maybe with businesses and some of the key property owners downtown. And then focus groups with groups of folks who have similar interests, and we can talk more from a topic standpoint about aspects of downtown. We're doing a market trend analysis, and then again, more news release and social media content will be developed as part of that. And information from these 3 steps is essentially what we'll be reviewing at the next downtown committee meeting in late June. Rita, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk a bit about community engagement.
All right, thanks, Bruce. So if you noticed, as Bruce walked through the stair-step kind of process, we had 3 key points that we were talking about: reaching out to the community, conducting community engagement. We really look at community engagement both from a virtual environment, such as what is shown on the left, and then an in-person environment. And we are excited because you did wait and we're able to delay the process. We are now, as you know, transitioning so that in-person engagement can become more part of this process than we have had in the past. So if we move on to the 3 steps or points at which we'll do engagement, the first point is part of looking at really getting people involved in the process. So right now we're starting to work on the communication part of it, the ongoing, making sure that we have information available when individuals are interested or when they hear about the process. We want to make sure that they're up to date. As you can see in the first grouping of strategies is really the communication. So Bruce had mentioned we're working on the social media, working with staff on updating a project website that would be specific and trying to keep that up to date. And then using the other types of communication the city does on a regular basis to build awareness about the project and interest. And so that when we have key moments where we have some information that we're seeking from business owners and residents, that we are able to capitalize on those and direct them to one location where all that information lives. And we're starting to look at strategies, and we're certainly open to more discussion on how do we solicit more input and receive more feedback. So the ones that we're looking at in person. So obviously the last meeting in April, we took a walking tour, which was really our first introduction, an opportunity to meet with you and see downtown together and identify some of those strategies. Looking at pop-up events, or the idea of going to where people already are instead of asking the community to come to us. The stakeholder meetings, listening sessions that Bruce mentioned. So the idea of specifically reaching out to folks that would have a particular interest in the planning process and asking for them to have a conversation with us and with staff so that we can really hear one-on-one or in smaller groups the types of things that are of interest and that we need to be aware of as we start working on the process. And then we have the larger, more traditional community workshops. And so those are things that we are able to do as well. And then supplementing is the virtual. We really had already started before COVID, but we have seen increasing interest, awareness, comfort level with the virtual types of engagement. So while we're excited at the opportunity to do more in-person and more one-on-one conversations, the virtual is still important because it does provide folks that maybe aren't able to meet with us at the times that are convenient to them, or maybe don't have an interest in driving specifically to a meeting to provide their feedback as well. And so the tool we traditionally use is called Social Pinpoint, and we'll use that at key points where we have found the ability to really reach out to community members and solicit input. We also have noted virtual stakeholder meetings, listening sessions, open houses. And the reason they're in italics is that if we find the need to, we are certainly capable of moving back to the virtual platform and have had success with those tools over the last year. But our hope is that we're moving out of that and we won't need to rely on those like we have in the past. But we certainly have learned a lot over the last year on how to hold those and how to have them still be effective in planning processes. So if we dive specifically at the 3 key points, the first is when we reach, you can see the calendar that Bruce had just walked through. So step 4, what the community wants to become. At the beginning of June, we are intending to do some type of community engagement. Right now, what we are looking at is doing a combination of listening sessions, doing a pop-up at the Arts in the Park. We've heard that will be available again this year, and I'm sure that folks are really interested in these types of events. So it'll be exciting to be out and be one of the groups there to have conversation with folks. We felt that was a good opportunity because of the fact that there's just the pace seems right for Arts in the Park in terms of it's an event where people are out, they're interested in chatting, having conversations, exploring booths. So we're talking about popping up, and at that point, it'll be to introduce the community to the project and solicit kind of general questions that are really interesting and easy for people to answer. And then we will also do at the same time the virtual social pinpoint, which is generally an opportunity where people can look at a particular area and provide feedback on a variety of topics. And so that's the proposed outreach kind of for the kickoff, the getting the community aware of it, starting to listen, starting to learn. And it's really about us asking questions, not so much about us having ideas that we propose to the community. So I think that's important to be aware is that is very focused on us listening and a lot not focused at all on us having any preconceived ideas that they would be reacting to. That opportunity for people to react would come in the next step when we go to step 6. That's when we actually have alternatives or ideas that we are going to be testing with the community, or we're going to be asking for what they think. And so those are best done in part through a community workshop where someone comes to a site, they're able to look at ideas, they're able to have discussion with staff, as well as the consultant team, as well as members of the EDA and the downtown committee. And so we're looking at having a community workshop, hopefully in person, and that'll be looking at September. There's also the pop-up potential at Lake Fest, so that'll look a little bit different. Obviously, we wouldn't be able to have the full community workshop feeling again. But again, that's another event where people are there and they would have an opportunity to learn about the project. And then always we have the social pinpoint that's behind the scenes. So even if they're not able to provide all of the information, they can go back and provide and look at what we are talking about and proposing. I just want to note in between, we did talk about whether July 4th was a good event or not a good event. Our thought is that it probably isn't as a helpful of event, just kind of the nature of that, and also not knowing exactly what's happening with the organization. It's not that quite the same event in terms of the leisurely pace and why people are at July 4th. So our thought right now is to focus more on the Arts in the Park. And if we need to do different Arts in the Park weeks, we've got obviously the whole summer to figure that out. And then Lake Fest, assuming that goes forward, and we'll have to understand how that's functioning. And I guess that's kind of the message overall about community engagement is we are going to be continuing to think about, and you obviously continue to converse with us about where are these opportunities, because we're open to ideas and we're trying to find the right ways to reach out to the community. So we certainly can look up at other events and just see how they time out with where we are in the process. And then the last point at which we really seek community input would be during step 8, once we have an implementation strategy, a plan in essence that people can react to. And again, looking at more of the community workshop setting, hopefully we've built relationships all the way along. So we have a list of people who have participated and are interested. We also, if there is a pop-up that would be available, if the timing works out, we can certainly look at that. Given the February timing, that may or may not time out with community events. And then we'd still have an online input opportunity. Generally, by that point, social pinpoint isn't quite the right tool. So we use other tools at that point, like posting of the report, posting of the information in some way that people can react to. So we're certainly interested in thoughts that folks may have about community engagement. This is our preliminary, as we looked at the schedule, how it timed out with events and where we know we want to generate input within the community. And then if there's other opportunities with the downtown business owners, we're certainly interested in that as well. And I know some chat came through, but I was having trouble talking and reading at the same time. I was trying to do both, but I don't think it was quite successful. So, but it seemed like some of them were about community engagement. So I wanted to make sure if there was something.
Excuse me, can I check and see if Mark Finneman is being heard?
Yes.
Yes, we hear you.
Oh, good. I lost you on my iPad, so I'm back to my phone, which is a strange place to be. So let me know when I can ask a question, because I'm just catching up here.
Go ahead and ask a question, and that'll give Rita an opportunity also to review the chat comments.
Okay, it might be inappropriately timed here because I missed a good deal of this last section. I wanted to talk about community engagement.
Perfect time.
Because I'm not terribly secure in that we're going to get a lot of community engagement according to history with this city. So I'm more inclined to think in terms of very specific stakeholders, business people, landowners, having a direct conversation with the planners as early as we can possibly set it up. I'm eager to set up a series of 6, 7 different businesses and landowners who would like to talk more intimately about what their needs and hopes and projections are. I think that's the most important programming that anybody's going to get here. So when you get to the point where you can talk about how I might do that, so that I can maybe have a direct connection with the planners, so that the individual business owners and such can be the ones who are accommodating their time schedule and not so much the planners or anybody else, and set up meetings on certain days. So help me understand that format and what I might do to set those things up.
So Mark, this is Bruce. We're going to set up, or we'd like to set up our first round of stakeholder meetings. So that would be individual conversations as well as some focus groups through this next month or so. Before we get, if we can, before we get to the end of June downtown committee meeting. So the way to do that is really, I think, to put together your list of folks that you're interested in us sitting down with and get that to Dan. And Dan is going to help kind of get things coordinated as well as provide kind of the context of that for us. And I think the way we'll do it is Rita and I, or Rita or I, maybe on different days, will come to town and just spend, a day there and try and meet with as many folks individually as we can, or maybe have some of those focus groups on those days as well. So over this next month, and coordinating through Dan is the way.
Well, if some of these people have set agendas or timetables in the town, out of town, I'd like to be able to dictate to some degree so they can participate when those meetings will occur. And some may well have to be in the evening.
Oh yeah, we'll make it work. We'll make it work.
Okay, I'll provide that list, but then let me know how we set this sort of thing up through Dan or otherwise, because I want them to be very sure that they get notified and that they're in the game.
It's really important to us too. So that's great. Thank you.
And then I want to address, I think it's Susan's comments that were about engagement. And I remember when we had the discussion when we were talking about the project initially that community engagement has been challenging to Forest Lake. And I think that is not unusual. I think that we will have to be working with you to collaborate on ideas and strategies. It is a little bit challenging right now to see how things have changed. There is a change that has happened over the last year in terms of the level of virtual engagement. I know that there's a change that has occurred in terms of the city website, the city newsletter, social media. So that's all going on at the same time. There's also probably a change in people's interest in being out and about that have changed as we have it. So trying to capture that and pick the right weeks to maybe go to Arts and Park. We may have more people or less people, but again, what I see as community engagement is it's an ongoing effort and it's a conversation throughout. While what we presented today are our thoughts, what we try and do is have it be an ongoing conversation with staff and with yourselves about what are new opportunities, did it work, did it not work, what should we try differently. I agree that the stakeholder and listening sessions will be very valuable because they're very particular and folks that are aware of downtown. What we will be probably needing to talk about is how do we strategize to get the broader community involved or visitors to downtown. So I don't think this is what we're proposing is the, for sure be all end all, this is exactly what we're going to do, but this is our initial strategy that we want to revisit with you on a regular basis and talk about, did it work? Did we get enough? It's hard to tell. An example is that we're working in a community where we're doing a park plan and that we did an electronic survey. They put up signs in every park in the community, and they ended up with nearly 10% of the population participating in the survey. So there's different strategies that have happened, and we haven't had an in-person meeting yet because of COVID. So those are the types of things that we're going to need to work with you on and see what works, what doesn't work, and just be in collaboration. And that's how community engagement needs to evolve. And right now, as we transition to in-person, it's going to be interesting to see. I've been in Forest Lake twice now since we saw you, and just the activation just in the downtown park has been interesting to see. I was there last Wednesday about 3 p.m, and the parking lot seemed full and there's people around. So there's certainly people doing things, at least in the park side of it. So how do we take advantage of those opportunities as well?
Rita, as you think about that specific, either whether it's a pop-up event or whether it is a booth at Arts in the Park, How do you, what does that experience look like if I'm a resident walking through? What do I see? What's the question that I'm being asked? How do you facilitate that to have a solid conversation? We did this as part of the 10-year comprehensive plan, and I found that if you didn't have some specific questions, the feedback was kind of all over the place, which sometimes is helpful, but sometimes you're looking for something that's more condensed. How do we, you know, with people's attentions being the corn dog in the booth next door, and my kid wants to hit the bouncy house, and I really want to pick up some produce, how do I, you know, hone in my attention on some feedback that's valuable to you? How do we tee that up so it's successful? Do you have some thoughts?
That will be something that we will be thinking about. I think I can't answer completely right now because the analysis that we're going to be doing will help shape a little bit the kinds of questions that we feel like we need to ask, or that would be the most beneficial to ask. We generally do try and do something interactive and kind of fun to draw people in. So I think, I don't remember what we had as examples, but for example, you know, for some projects we have, you know, the little cutouts that you can do and take a picture of, something that draws people in that you can use as a basis for getting them involved in the conversation, not just having someone standing at the booth and doesn't look welcoming. So something that engages folks so that they'll take a conversation, and then it can't be in depth. It can't be, you know, 10 questions or a question that takes a lot of answer. It needs to be something quick, something that really, but still gives us feedback. So at the fundamental level, when we design community engagement, we really try and focus on, you know, who are we trying to reach? What is the question that we're trying to ask, or what are they capable of providing us, and recognizing the moment that we're in. On the online, we'll be able to ask a lot more in-depth questions, but on the pop-up, we're more trying to explain what we're doing and trying to get that initial feedback and hopefully engage them so they'll be interested to go and check it out on the website or those types of things. So it's partly in communication and building awareness, and partly about getting some information.
Perfect. What other questions do we have at this point? These are great questions, and this is an important topic because I think we want to get through this process feeling like we've done all that we can and we've had a successful community engagement effort. Jenny, go ahead.
Yeah, have you done in the past, or any of the cities you've worked with, had like a table set up at the grocery stores where people walk by and you just have some simple questions for them? Do you live in Forest Lake? You know, what would you like to see downtown? And engage them that way. Maybe you won't get very many, but at least you'll get some feedback. Go in front of the Legion, do the same thing. Go to Cherrywood Point. And Cherrywood Point would be a good one to survey the seniors and find out what they'd like within walking distance of downtown. And then a survey of the business owners just written, but go where the people are. Can you set up like a table in front of Cub and Walmart and just say, hey, you're interested in the downtown area, and what would you like to see? Is that possible, or has anybody done it?
No, certainly we have done it as part of strategies for doing community engagement. It really has depended on the project and what we're trying to get and picking the right times. So that's something we can certainly talk about. A little bit of the challenge or hesitation that I might have is knowing where downtown is and knowing where some of those places are and knowing how much of a broad section that you serve. So we certainly can think about that, especially as we evaluate, are we reaching out to the people that we want to? Are we seeing engagement or not? We can certainly add on and augment and have those conversations. But we definitely have done a range of elements of reaching out to people in different ways, such as you said, at grocery stores. Sometimes people go to school. Sometimes you go to multifamily housing complexes where there's a lot of folks. But we need to strategize about that. Who do we need to reach out to? And how do we best do that? But those are definitely great examples of how we can do that.
I'll only add that the engagement that we do as part of this process is not statistically accurate. So we're looking for impressions. We're looking for people's beliefs and feelings as a way to gauge where we have kind of themes emerging That will help us establish the vision. That will give us feedback to concepts, as well as feedback to the draft plan. So I just wanted to mention that we don't have any statistically accurate survey work as part of this effort.
I think maybe it would be helpful for this group, and I think probably implied in your plan is just some frequent updates on how we're doing so far related to community engagement, how that relates to your other clients, and then opportunities for this group to help on, oh, well, we should be here, or what we might need to do to pivot to make sure we're hitting that.
Great idea.
Yes, thank you. Because I do want it to be, I think it's important that it be a conversation, and it's hard to evaluate at the front end. It's better to evaluate once we've done something and can say, this is what happened. What do you think? Or what should we be focusing on? Is it what you said, the grocery store or Cherrywood Point or something like that? Or is there another event that, because there's going to be things that happen this summer that either have never happened before or are now coming online that none of us knew about at this point. So there may be new opportunities. Or maybe it's just being downtown on a weekend when there's a lot of activity in the traffic, and take advantage of all the people that are there and to try and grab them. So lots of different things we can think about.
Blake, I think you had a question.
Yeah, so Bruce, Rita, the city within the last year has been informally approached from a developer to take a project that would encompass about a third of one part of downtown. I don't, that was real informal, and I don't know where those talks are now, but would you suggest that we vet out some of those developers and see, especially if it is a major project like that, if we're looking at the future in the downtown, where they're at with that, and maybe how that might be included in this plan? Because what they had proposed includes some parking and some residential, some retail, so major piece, and I just don't want that to get missed as we start moving forward on this and not circle back to someone who has approached the city, anyone, whether it's formally or informally, to have those conversations, see where they're at.
Sorry, Mark, if you have a piggyback comment and you're also on mute, go ahead. Mark, you're on mute. Oh, Mark, you're still on mute.
I'm good now?
Yes.
Okay, good. I did want to piggyback on what Blake said, because I was approaching it from the existing ownership and landowners and business owners, and I hope that would have drawn out the potential developers. But if they are known, if there's a chance for them to become involved, I don't know who they are necessarily, but I do know the present day ownership. And I think there's the hints of all this, and if we can draw them out, that would be wonderful, and get them on a list for discussion, even if it's informal.
Right now, we're in the process of trying to identify everyone who should be on that stakeholder list, including potential investors. So, Blake, that would address, this developer evidently who is interested in downtown. We would want to have a conversation with them as part of our interviews.
If I might also ask at this particular point in time, I think the city put out a more aggressive outreach for this particular meeting, unless I'm wrong. I think that was the case. And I'm still not sure if we're getting much of a participation at this point for a meeting like this. Was I on mute?
Nope, you're not on mute. So there's about 50 email addresses on the group invite that gets, those that are flagged as members of this group. And if there are additional names that should be added, obviously, we're happy to do so.
Well, mine's just a curiosity as to how many people are participating now, because it seems like we're really light on the business side of life here.
We've got so we've got 17 tonight, core of which is EDA and council. And certainly, let's be thinking about what else we need to do in our individual networks to increase that. I've heard from a couple of members, and this is just anecdotally, of those that are on that are, they're kind of watching the agenda, they're watching, and will engage at a future point. I think there are some that are just, this is kind of getting up to speed and gathering steam, and they're more interested when we're a little closer into the meat of the project. Has been some anecdotal feedback I've heard. But if there are some that are, if we're just missing components of the community that need to be on that list, let's get them on.
Mayor, I just have one more screen to share, one more
Please.
slide. Again, this is review for some of you, but I think it might be helpful in looking at kind of how all of this fits together. So the way we think of downtown plans is that it's it's a plan that is created that directs decisions and investments over time. Some of those are your decisions, some of those are outside investors' decisions, but essentially the downtown plan we view as the power that goes behind a community vision for this district, which is your downtown. And that vision shines a light on a whole host of things that are going to happen over time. Some of those are public realm improvements, some of those are activation strategies, and some of those are redevelopment projects. And those efforts will kind of come and go, or they will come online, they'll get accomplished, and you'll be able to move on to the next activity. Essentially moving through the recommendations and the action steps that are within the downtown plan. So this is a dynamic process, a dynamic plan that you're embarking on, and it's going to lead to a lot of things for you to do if you choose to do them over time. And I mentioned earlier that the life of a downtown plan typically is a decade to 15 years or so. And beyond that point, you'll want to think about, refreshing the plan and thinking about the next iteration of the downtown plan. So those are all the slides that I've got. We still have, I think, a few minutes for Q&A. If there's more, we are happy to answer questions.
As we lead into Q&A, Rita and Bruce, can you just, and Dan as well, can you just kind of set expectations of engagement of this group again? I know we walked through the whole plan, but kind of now pulling it all the way back to this group and when we would expect to be involved again. When is that, and what is that structure?
We have our next tentative meeting of this group to review the analysis work that we've developed for the end of June. I forget the exact date. It's a Monday. Dan, I'm looking to Dan.
Yeah, the next meeting will be on June 28th, which will be the next scheduled downtown committee meeting. Will be the next review, as Bruce has mentioned.
And will you have started participating in Arts in the Park before that, or do we pick up Arts in the Park towards the latter part of the summer? I know I'm way in the weeds. I'm just trying to set this group's expectations for involvement.
I think we certainly could start before that date. We wouldn't have any feedback necessarily for you at that meeting. The month of July is kind of when we'll be developing a little bit more idea around the vision and the values of the community. But I would say June, July timeframe, we should be starting that. And if it works in June, fantastic. If we need to wait till July, that's fine too.
That works. I'll just open it up. What other questions does the group have? Any other questions or feedback? All right. Dan, anything further that you would like the committee to review tonight?
No, that was it. Only thing on the agenda for this evening was just the kickoff plan or kickoff meeting for the downtown plan.
Well, thank you all. We really appreciate the opportunity to go through this and launch this project. Super fun.
Fantastic. Thank you everyone for being here, and Bruce and Rita for getting us kicked off. As most of you know, council has on a month-to-month agenda the status of our in-person meetings. The suggested feedback at the last meeting was the desire to just get a little bit further for some additional vaccines to be in the community before we resume in-person meetings. That was done before the mask mandate was lifted. That was done before the most recent governor's orders. And so I expect that council, I can't speak for council, but I expect that council will be, I know that we will be reevaluating that between, I think it's the first meeting, our first meeting in June. So before we meet again. So there may be an opportunity to have in-person back in play. It's, as everyone knows, that situation's evolving rapidly. So stay tuned. And I know I can speak personally. I look forward to seeing all of you in person. So look for in that next agenda, just confirmation of what that structure is. But we have heard your feedback and the overall desire to be in person specifically for this group. Also know that that only means for official public meetings. Some of the individual stakeholder meetings, those are able to take place in person. It's just, we're still waiting for the green light on these, on our official committee meetings and city council meetings. All right, with that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move we adjourn.
I'll second.
We have a motion from member Lorge and a second from member Finneman. And Karen, could we get just a final roll call vote for adjournment?
Member Roberts,
Aye.
Member Huntosh,
Aye.
Member Husnick,
Aye.
Member Finneman,
Aye.
Member Lorge,
Aye.
and President Bain.
We are adjourned. Thank you, everybody, for the engagement tonight. We'll see you.